It began with a whisper, a single, unverified rumor circulating quietly in the corners of the internet, dismissed by many as yet another tabloid fantasy. But within days, that whisper turned into a storm. When the name Doria Ragland appeared beside phrases like leaked emails and voice recordings, even the most skeptical observers took a second look. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. The woman once described as Meghan Markle's rock, her private confidant and moral compass, had allegedly broken her silence, and what she revealed could change everything. Imagine, for a moment, the shock of a mother betraying her daughter. Not out of spite, not out of envy, but out of desperation. A final act to stop what she believed had gone too far. According to reports, Doria had allegedly handed over private emails, recordings, and internal messages that paint a chilling picture of an influence operation orchestrated from behind closed doors. A campaign meant to manipulate the media, tarnish reputations, and shift public sentiment in Meghan's favor at any cost. For the royal family, already wounded by years of controversy, this wasn't just a scandal. It was an attack from within the very walls they once tried to protect her from. But how did we get here? How did the smiling yoga instructor from Los Angeles, once seen quietly supporting her daughter through royal life, become the center of a political and moral firestorm that could bring down one of the world's most powerful celebrity brands? To understand Doria's alleged betrayal, we first have to understand Meghan's journey. Not the fairy tale version we saw in magazines, but the unseen strategy unfolding behind the curtain. From the moment Meghan entered the royal family, her image became her greatest weapon. Public sympathy was carefully cultivated. Media narratives were shaped and reshaped. To some, she was the modern Cinderella, a woman of color breaking barriers inside a centuries-old institution. To others, she was a master manipulator, skilled in turning public perception into personal power. And according to these new leaks, her mother may have witnessed the evolution firsthand, from ambition to obsession, from image management to influence warfare. Doria's role in Meghan's life was never loud. She was the quiet presence, the steady calm in a world of noise. During Meghan's royal wedding in 2018, she sat alone in the pews, graceful yet isolated, as cameras captured her every breath. She was hailed as the symbol of dignity, the humble woman who raised a duchess. But now that very image is cracking. Reports claim Doria couldn't remain silent any longer, not after discovering what she allegedly described in private messages as a machine designed to destroy anyone who stood in her way. It's a story that reads like a political thriller. Hidden payments, secret PR contracts, fake online campaigns, and carefully timed media leaks. The allegation that Meghan Markle paid private public relations firms to orchestrate smear campaigns against senior members of the royal family, to push damaging stories while boosting her own narrative of victimhood and independence. And Doria, torn between love and conscience, may have decided the truth had to come out, even if it meant losing her daughter forever. There's a strange irony to it all. Meghan's rise to fame was built on the very values of transparency, empowerment, and authenticity. She spoke passionately about truth and integrity. Yet, behind those speeches, a different truth was allegedly being written, one crafted through spin, strategy, and silence. According to what Doria's leaks suggest, this wasn't accidental media attention. It was deliberate construction, a network of influence funded, coordinated, and directed with precision. As details of the alleged leaks spread, the reaction was instant. Newsrooms scrambled. Social media exploded. Was this real? Could Meghan's own mother truly have turned against her? And if so, what could have driven her to such a drastic decision? Some sources claim Doria was pushed to the edge, frustrated by Meghan's increasing manipulation of both truth and family ties. Others believe she felt trapped, knowing too much, fearing that silence made her complicit. In one reported message, Doria allegedly wrote, "I watched her become someone I don't recognize. Whether those words are genuine or not, they struck a nerve with millions who once admired their unbreakable bond." The leaks allegedly contained not just gossip, but cold, calculated strategy. They reportedly exposed how Meghan's team identified weaknesses within the royal institution and exploited them through subtle press narratives, how sympathy could be turned into power, and how power could then be used to shape public outrage. This wasn't the story of a woman mistreated by an ancient system. It was the story of someone who allegedly learned how to weaponize that system's flaws. And if Doria's information is accurate, she may have revealed the very blueprint of that operation. But every story has two sides. Meghan's supporters argue that this is yet another smear, a cruel manipulation of family pain. They insist Doria's leak could have been fabricated, her voice manipulated, her trust exploited by those who seek to destroy Meghan's reputation once and for all. Others see a pattern, a repeated cycle of exposure, denial, and deflection that has followed Meghan through every phase of her public life. Whatever the truth, one thing is certain. The world is watching, and this time the storm is coming from inside the house. For years, the royal family tried to keep the peace. Behind palace doors, aides begged both sides for calm. Charles, William, and Catherine reportedly maintained their distance, wary of feeding the fire. But Doria's alleged confession, if verified, changes the stakes. This isn't a tabloid feud anymore. It's a question of credibility, ethics, and legacy. Did Meghan Markle truly attempt to dismantle one of the oldest monarchies in the world to rebuild herself as the queen of modern influence? Or is this all a tragic family implosion, misunderstood and misused by the press? The middle of this unfolding drama is where emotion meets calculation. Doria's decision to come forward, if authentic, would have been one of the most painful choices a parent could make. Every word leaked carries the weight of betrayal, yet perhaps also the hope of redemption. What kind of mother exposes her daughter to public ruin? And what kind of daughter leaves her mother feeling like she must? These are not easy questions. But the leaked evidence, emails, voice notes, internal PR documents, appears to trace back to a carefully designed strategy that was allegedly built long before Megxit. Insiders claim the groundwork was laid even before Meghan's engagement to Prince Harry, with early outreach to Hollywood PR specialists who understood how to craft both crisis and narrative. Doria, according to whispers from close friends, began noticing inconsistencies, secret meetings, coded calls, and projects shrouded in NDAs. When the dust settled, she may have realized she wasn't watching her daughter fight for truth, but watching her construct one. And then came the voice notes. If real, they could be the most explosive part of the entire scandal. Sources say they capture Meghan discussing media leverage, referencing senior royals in clipped, strategic tones. There's mention of timing, of controlling the news cycle, of ensuring the right emotion reaches the right audience. These weren't the words of a victim cornered by press cruelty. They sounded like the strategy of someone who understood how to weaponize perception itself. It's here that Doria allegedly reached her breaking point. The same woman who once defended Meghan in interviews, who smiled through paparazzi flashes and refused to sell her story, may have realized she had been helping build something she could no longer stand behind. Reports claim that after hearing one particularly damning recording, she contacted a trusted intermediary, someone outside Hollywood, outside royal circles, to share what she knew. She didn't go to the tabloids directly. She went to people who could verify and protect her. That, in itself, adds weight to the credibility of her decision. By the time the leaks surfaced publicly, it was too late. Screenshots were already circulating, and snippets of audio had begun spreading like wildfire. Analysts and royal commentators started connecting dots that had been hiding in plain sight for years. The timing of stories, the precision of media pivots, the uncanny ability to redirect public outrage, all now seemed part of a larger, deliberate pattern. Suddenly, the narrative surrounding Meghan Markle shifted once again, not as the hunted duchess, but as the hunter. Yet at the center of this chaos is a mother's silence breaking, echoing louder than any headline. For Doria Ragland, this moment marks an irreversible crossing. If the reports are true, she can never return to anonymity, never again be seen as the quiet, graceful figure sitting alone at a royal wedding. Her name will forever be tied to one of the most controversial betrayals in modern celebrity history. A daughter accused of building an empire of influence, and a mother who decided to tear it down. As the world watches, the final question remains. Was this about truth or vengeance? Did Doria expose her daughter to protect others, or to cleanse her own conscience after years of complicity? No one can yet say for sure, but one thing is undeniable. This story has cracked the facade of one of the most carefully curated public images in recent memory. What comes next will test not only Meghan's resilience but the credibility of everything she has built. The end of this introduction is not a conclusion. It is a threshold. The lines between family and fame, love and loyalty, have blurred beyond recognition. We are about to step into a world of private recordings, encrypted messages, secret contracts, and shattered trust. A world where a mother's love collided head-on with a daughter's ambition. This is not just a royal scandal. It is a human tragedy, wrapped in fame, power, and silence. So the question becomes, when Doria Ragland finally decided to speak, what exactly did she say? And who was truly listening? Before the leaks, before the headlines, before the betrayal that would divide a mother and daughter forever, there was calm. A fragile, almost deceptive calm that disguised the growing tension beneath. To the world, Meghan Markle and her mother Doria Ragland were a picture of unbreakable unity. They were the modern image of mother-daughter closeness, poised, private, and proud. When cameras caught them together, there was always a shared look of understanding, a subtle smile that spoke volumes. No one could have predicted that behind that bond, fault lines were forming, fault lines that would one day split the Markle name in two. In the early days of Meghan's rise to fame, Doria was her grounding force. She was the yoga teacher, the calm voice, the steady heartbeat behind her daughter's ambitions. Friends recalled Doria as a woman of quiet dignity, someone who avoided gossip and preferred the peace of her small Los Angeles home over Hollywood noise. Meghan often spoke of her mother with affection, the woman who raised her to find her own light, who taught her that grace mattered more than glamour. In interviews, Doria's name came up often, always framed as the voice of wisdom guiding her daughter through chaos. But that narrative, like so much else in Meghan's story, may not have been as simple as it seemed. The years leading up to Meghan's royal marriage were a whirlwind. Television fame, humanitarian work, and the growing buzz around her personal life created an image of the perfect modern woman. Doria watched her daughter navigate red carpets and magazine spreads with pride. She was there in quiet moments, helping Meghan rehearse speeches, offering encouragement before interviews, and reminding her to stay humble. But pride slowly mixed with worry. Those close to the family later described how Doria began noticing a change in her daughter's tone when talking about the press. Less gratitude, more control. Meghan's relationship with media wasn't just about managing her image anymore. It was about commanding it. When Prince Harry entered the picture, everything shifted. What started as a private romance quickly became an international obsession. The press was relentless. Meghan was adored and attacked in equal measure. The fairy tale of an American actress marrying into British royalty captivated the world. But behind the glitz and photo ops, tension brewed. Doria, still in Los Angeles, found herself thrust into royal life by association. Reporters camped outside her home. Old friends were approached for stories. Yet, through it all, she remained silent. Composed, unreadable, the eye of the storm. That silence became her trademark. Even after the wedding, when Meghan's relationship with the royal family began to fray, Doria stayed out of the fray. She didn't give interviews, didn't sell photos, didn't write a tell-all. While Meghan's father, Thomas Markle, became a fixture in tabloids, Doria was seen as the respectable counterpoint, the one who didn't break the family's dignity. For a time, she was loved by both the public and the palace for her restraint. But inside her private world, things were changing. According to people close to the situation, Doria started to feel her daughter pulling away. Meghan's calls became shorter, her tone more assertive, her focus entirely on media strategy and public image. Doria, who once advised patience and humility, now found herself ignored. There were rumors that Meghan had begun consulting with professional image consultants long before her royal engagement. firms that specialized in online perception, influencer relationships, and narrative redirection. Doria, perhaps out of motherly trust, didn't ask too many questions. But she noticed a pattern. Stories would appear in the press that seemed too perfectly timed, too strategically placed. One week, it would be a flattering feature about Meghan's charity work. The next, a scandal about another royal's rumored misstep. The public saw coincidence. Doria saw choreography. The difference between those two words would one day become her moral breaking point. The early months of royal life were the calm before everything exploded. Meghan's charm was undeniable. The media adored her at first. But as headlines turned, as public scrutiny intensified, Doria noticed her daughter hardening. Meghan began to see enemies everywhere. Inside the palace, inside the press, sometimes even inside her own family. She spoke about manipulation and control, about taking back her narrative. And that's when Doria began hearing unfamiliar names, PR firms, consultants, digital reputation managers. They were professionals known not for honesty, but for precision in persuasion. Meghan had entered a new battlefield: influence. It wasn't unusual for celebrities to manage their public image, but the way Meghan approached it felt different. Sources later claimed she wanted total command over perception. Every story, every post, every leak, nothing was accidental. Meghan reportedly described media coverage as a chessboard, where every headline could be repositioned, every critic could be countered. Doria, listening quietly, began to realize that her daughter's life had turned into a full-scale operation of self-promotion, and that operation required targets. During private conversations, Meghan allegedly spoke of strategic silence, a term she used to describe when to let false narratives circulate if they benefited her. Doria was unsettled by how casually her daughter discussed manipulation. The same woman who once cried over negative tabloid coverage now seemed to treat outrage as a useful tool. According to friends, Doria confided that she no longer recognized Meghan's voice when they spoke about the media. She used to talk about stories, one confidant recalled. Now she talked about campaigns. In public, Doria maintained the role of the dignified mother, but in private, she began to document small details, messages, phrases, instructions that sounded more like commands than conversations. First, she told herself it was nothing. After all, mothers always want to believe their children are good at heart. But doubt began to creep in. The warmth between them started to fade, replaced by a quiet tension that neither would acknowledge. Meghan's ambition had become an engine that didn't stop, and Doria, standing at the edges, started wondering who was really in control. Then came the first real warning sign. A story appeared in a British tabloid criticizing a senior royal's handling of a public event. It was harsh, personal, and oddly detailed. Within days, online accounts began circulating nearly identical talking points, defending Meghan while subtly attacking the palace. The coordination was uncanny. Doria, watching from her living room, recognized phrases her daughter had once used in private conversation. It was as if Meghan's voice was echoing through anonymous accounts and polished headlines. She didn't have proof, but her instincts told her something deliberate was happening. At the same time, Doria noticed a shift in Meghan's entourage. Familiar names disappeared, replaced by unfamiliar faces: digital strategists, social media managers, reputation specialists. Meghan surrounded herself with people who understood power through visibility. Doria, who valued privacy, began to feel alienated. The mother-daughter bond was thinning under the weight of image management. Conversations that once ended with laughter now ended in cold silences. The calm before the storm is often the most deceptive phase of all. The public saw smiling photos and loving quotes, but behind closed doors, small cracks were spreading across their relationship. Doria was still loyal then, still hopeful that Meghan would eventually step back, slow down, and remember where she came from. But that hope would fade fast. The first leaked recording, the first forwarded email, the first confession whispered into a friend's ear. All of it was still to come. For now, there was only stillness, like the air before thunder. In those quiet months, Doria began keeping her distance. She focused on her yoga students, tried to drown out the noise. But the stories kept coming, always spinning in Meghan's favor, always suspiciously timed. She started to receive calls from reporters who claimed to have sources close to Doria. They were quoting things she never said, implying opinions she never voiced. Someone, somewhere, was using her silence as part of a larger strategy. That realization terrified her. She wasn't just on the sidelines anymore. She was being played as a pawn in a game she didn't understand. By the time Meghan and Harry announced their departure from royal duties, the calm was gone. What had once been manageable differences between mother and daughter had turned into emotional distance. Meghan was no longer seeking her mother's advice. She was issuing instructions. Doria, by then, was no longer convinced those instructions came from a place of clarity. They came from fear of losing relevance, fear of losing control over the narrative. The media storm surrounding Megxit only confirmed Doria's suspicions that her daughter had built an entire empire of influence, one that didn't just tell stories but engineered them. Yet even then, Doria remained silent. She hadn't leaked anything, hadn't spoken to Journal. Meanwhile, in Los Angeles, Doria Ragland was starting to hear similar murmurs. Old acquaintances, PR insiders, and even one of Meghan's former publicists reached out with quiet concern. They mentioned a company, a boutique digital firm known for aggressive media strategies, subtle narrative redirection, and the use of dark PR. A controversial tactic that uses misinformation and emotional framing to manipulate public perception. Doria listened, unsettled but unsure of what to believe. Her daughter had always been ambitious, always driven, but the notion that she might be orchestrating a media campaign that targeted others, including the royal family, seemed unthinkable. Still, as more details surfaced, Doria began to sense that the whispers weren't random. They were warnings. The first real clue emerged through social media. Accounts defending Meghan appeared across multiple platforms, all with similar language and identical timing. Their posts attacked perceived critics of the Duchess, journalists, commentators, even random online users who questioned her actions. They spread hashtags promoting Meghan's projects, amplifying positive stories while discrediting others. Data analysts noticed the pattern. The activity wasn't organic. It was orchestrated. The accounts followed each other in clusters, their tweets mirrored within minutes, and many originated from the same regions known for PR automation networks. To the public, it looked like support. To experts, it looked like coordination. Around this time, a freelance journalist named Clara Higgins, who had covered the royal family for over a decade, began digging deeper. She'd seen media manipulation before, but something about Meghan's coverage felt unusually synchronized. Clara followed the threads, tracing IP patterns, timestamps, and cross-platform engagement rates. What she found startled her. Several of the social media pages defending Meghan shared links to small digital marketing firms in California, one of which had previously worked with Hollywood celebrities to suppress negative press through search engine cleansing. The technique involved flooding the internet with favorable content to bury damaging stories. Clara published nothing at first. She needed proof, but the pieces were starting to fit. Meanwhile, Doria was watching her daughter's public transformation with mixed emotions. She had always admired Meghan's intelligence and confidence, but lately, her daughter's tone had changed. Meghan spoke less about charity and more about influence. She began using phrases like controlling the narrative, counterpunching the press, and neutralizing threats. At first, Doria assumed this was just the language of a woman hardened by years of media abuse. But as Meghan grew more powerful, more strategic, and less compassionate, Doria started keeping mental notes. Something didn't feel right. The first true confirmation of those suspicions came during a dinner in Montecito, months before the leaks. Meghan, relaxed and unguarded among her close circle, reportedly spoke about a plan to reshape how the monarchy was perceived. Doria, who was present at the gathering, listened as Meghan described perception management as the future of power. "The palace doesn't get it," Meghan allegedly said. "They still believe respect is earned through silence. But in this world, silence is weakness. Whoever controls the story controls history." The words stayed with Doria long after the laughter and wine faded. They weren't just statements of frustration, they were blueprints. Soon after, Doria began noticing small inconsistencies. Stories that Meghan swore she had nothing to do with turned out to contain details only insiders could know. Exclusive interviews appeared quoting unnamed friends, but the wording sounded familiar, too familiar. One night, Doria scrolled through her phone and stumbled upon a quote attributed to an anonymous source close to the Duchess. The phrasing mirrored something Meghan herself had said days earlier. That's when it clicked. Her daughter wasn't just defending herself in the media, she was directing it. Whispers about Meghan's behind-the-scenes maneuvering reached the press. A British columnist hinted in an op-ed that someone in Montecito has a very expensive media plan. Royal correspondents, wary of lawsuits, stopped short of naming names, but among journalists, the phrase influence operation became shorthand for what many suspected, that Meghan had built a private network to sway coverage globally. The operation's alleged purpose wasn't just reputation repair. It was control. It aimed to shape the very way the public perceived the monarchy, with Meghan at the moral center and the palace as the antagonist. For Doria, these rumors were agonizing. On one hand, she wanted to protect her daughter. On the other, she couldn't ignore the ethical implications of what she was hearing. She tried to confront Meghan gently during a private conversation. "Meg, they're saying things about you," she began. "They're saying you're hiring people to spread stories." Meghan, according to those familiar with the conversation, brushed it off with a laugh. "Mom, people say everything about me. Don't believe the noise." But there was something in her tone, detached, almost rehearsed. It wasn't the warmth Doria remembered. It was the precision of someone who'd said those words many times before. As weeks turned into months, the whispers became reports. Leaked invoices began surfacing from firms allegedly connected to the Duchess's team. Some were for strategic narrative guidance, others for reputation optimization. None directly mentioned the royal family, but insiders understood the implication. The timing of payments matched suspicious waves of coverage. Positive features about Meghan right after damaging palace rumors. The evidence wasn't definitive, but the patterns were undeniable. Doria's heart sank. She tried to make sense of it all. Was Meghan truly behind this? Or was she being misled by people around her, advisors, managers, consultants who saw profit in her public conflict with the monarchy? It was easier to blame outsiders, to think her daughter was just caught up in something bigger. But then came the emails. One evening, while helping Meghan organize her digital correspondence for a charity project, Doria reportedly stumbled across an email thread between Meghan and a senior consultant from a private firm in Los Angeles. The subject line read, "Phase 3, Public Sentiment Shift." The language was clinical, calculated. Phrases like targeted emotion cycle, message seeding, and counterpositioning monarchy narratives jumped out at her. Doria's hands trembled as she scrolled. This wasn't standard PR. This was a war plan, psychological, deliberate, and personal. The realization hit her like a cold wave. Her daughter wasn't just playing defense. She was waging a campaign. Doria didn't confront Meghan immediately. Instead, she began quietly observing, noting inconsistencies in Meghan's public statements versus her private actions. Each contradiction chipped away at the image of the daughter she thought she knew. She found herself torn between loyalty and morality, between love and responsibility. What she didn't know was that others were also beginning to piece together the same puzzle. Journalists began asking subtle questions. Tech analysts examined patterns in online engagement. A royal staff member leaked hints of internal frustration with Meghan's unofficial communication channels. It was all still whispers, still speculation, but it was growing. Every whisper was a thread, and Doria, perhaps unknowingly, was holding the spool. The first whispers eventually reached the palace's crisis management team. King Charles's advisors were briefed on possible external coordination, influencing media coverage. They treated it cautiously, aware that any public accusation would explode into an international feud. But behind closed doors, a quiet investigation began. Digital traces were examined, external consultants were identified, and certain press outlets were monitored for suspicious consistency. For the royal family, it was a delicate dance, investigating a woman who was both an outsider and, through marriage, still one of their own. Meanwhile, Doria's internal conflict grew unbearable. She began saving copies of documents, forwarding suspicious files to a private email, unsure what to do with them. Perhaps she believed that one day, the truth would need to be told. Perhaps she only wanted to understand how far things had gone. But as she listened to her daughter speak publicly about compassion, empathy, and integrity, the gap between Meghan's words and actions became too wide to ignore. Doria saw both sides, the public saint and the private strategist, and she no longer knew which one was real. The calm mask that Meghan wore in interviews, the charm that had won millions of hearts, began to look more like armor. Doria knew her daughter too well to miss the signs. The rehearsed pauses, the manufactured tears, the way her voice tightened when she said, "I just want peace." It wasn't peace she wanted. It was control. And peace cannot coexist with control. By the time the whispers became headlines, Doria had already begun distancing herself emotionally. She attended fewer events, declined interviews, and stayed mostly silent. The press interpreted her quiet as loyalty, but in truth it was fear of what might happen if she spoke too soon. She knew that behind the curated smiles and Instagram-perfect narratives, a reckoning was coming. She didn't know when or how, but she could feel it. Because whispers, once released into the world, never really die. They grow louder, clearer, until they form words that can no longer be ignored. And those words were about to shake the palace walls and destroy the silence Doria had clung to for far too long. The day the first email surfaced, everything changed. It was short, clinical, and unsettlingly direct, the kind of message that stripped away any illusion of coincidence. The subject line read, "Narrative Reversal, Q3 Implementation." The sender's name was redacted in early reports, but the body of the email spoke volumes. It discussed strategy, timing, and precision. It outlined how public sentiment could be shifted within 72 hours through a series of coordinated press releases, online engagement bursts, and social amplification from friendly influencers. It wasn't just about protecting Meghan's image anymore. It was about dismantling the credibility of those who stood against her. And the most shocking part of all, it appeared to have originated from Meghan's private digital consultancy team. The Royal Smear Blueprint, as analysts would later nickname it, wasn't one document but a collection of instructions, memos, and digital campaign outlines that, when pieced together, revealed a chilling level of intent. The emails, allegedly leaked by Doria Ragland herself, painted a picture of a full-scale influence operation, not one driven by revenge or vanity, but by design. The operation's core idea was simple. If you control the narrative, you control the truth. And if you control the truth, you control history. The plan allegedly began in the months following Meghan and Harry's royal wedding, when cracks between the couple and the royal family were beginning to show. According to the leaked correspondence, Meghan's PR advisors crafted a strategy to counteract what they called the palace narrative. They viewed the royal family's communications office as an old, outdated system vulnerable to modern media manipulation. In one internal note, a consultant reportedly wrote, "The monarchy communicates at the speed of tradition. We communicate at the speed of emotion." It was a declaration of information warfare, framed not as defense but as conquest. The blueprint broke down audiences into emotional categories: sympathetic, neutral, and resistant. Each group was to be targeted differently. Sympathetic audiences received stories that reinforced Meghan's identity as a modern, compassionate woman wronged by an archaic institution. Neutral audiences were targeted with emotional triggers: motherhood, race, and philanthropy. Universal narratives designed to humanize her and provoke empathy. The resistant audience, which included royal traditionalists and conservative media, was to be disrupted. The term appeared repeatedly in the leaked documents. Disrupt, confuse, dilute. The language of warfare translated into public relations. One document in particular stood out: an internal memo titled Project Reset. It was a proposed campaign aimed at rebranding Meghan as both victim and visionary. The goal wasn't merely to win sympathy. It was to rewrite her public identity from the ground up. It proposed calculated interviews, anonymous sources strategically placed in media outlets, and influencer collaborations designed to keep her constantly visible and relatable. The same memo allegedly included a schedule of distraction drops, carefully timed leaks of minor royal controversies, meant to redirect public focus whenever Meghan faced backlash. The precision was unnerving. According to sources close to Doria, she stumbled across fragments of this plan while organizing digital files for Meghan's charity communications. What she found wasn't one-off strategy notes, it was an ecosystem. Dozens of subfolders categorized under names like echo operations, sentiment shifts, and media recoding. Each contained outlines for posts, quote templates, and influencer scripts. Doria reportedly froze when she saw the line that read, "Prioritize emotional currency over factual accuracy." That was the moment she realized this wasn't standard PR. This was manipulation engineered for effect. Doria didn't confront Meghan immediately. She sat with it, trying to understand. Part of her wanted to believe that her daughter was simply fighting back against years of unfair treatment. After all, Meghan had endured relentless scrutiny. Perhaps this was just her way of reclaiming control. But the more Doria read, the clearer it became that this was not defense, it was domination. The strategy revolved around controlling perception by undermining trust in others, including the very family that had once welcomed her into royalty. The emails referenced specific moments that aligned disturbingly well with public events. One note dated shortly before a major royal anniversary read, "Counterprogram royal coverage with exclusive humanitarian piece. Timing, 24 hours prior. Ensure royal fatigue narrative trend." That same week, an interview featuring Meghan's charitable efforts went viral, overshadowing the palace's milestone event. Another file discussed strategic empathy outreach, orchestrating stories of emotional hardship or misunderstanding to draw attention away from controversy. When royal aides later reviewed the leaked documents, many admitted that they had long suspected manipulation but had never been able to prove it. The leaks provided the missing puzzle piece. The precision of media timing, the uncanny predictability of online support spikes, everything suddenly made sense. To them, the leaks confirmed what they had only whispered about behind closed doors. There was a deliberate campaign against the institution itself. Analysts who examined the content later concluded that the structure resembled modern influence operations used in politics and corporate warfare. The principles were the same: emotional targeting, information flooding, and credibility erosion. One former intelligence expert commented anonymously, saying, "This wasn't tabloid-level media work. Whoever designed this understood behavioral influence. They understood how to move sentiment without leaving fingerprints." For Doria, that realization was devastating. She had spent her life believing in authenticity, in truth-telling. To find her daughter entangled in a system that thrived on deception and manipulation broke something inside her. Still, she stayed silent. She hoped it would stop. She hoped Meghan would realize how far she had gone. But hope can only last so long when the evidence is staring back at you from your own inbox. Then came the voice notes. In one alleged recording, Meghan can be heard discussing how to handle a negative headline about a royal event. Her tone was calm, detached. "We'll let it run for 48 hours, she allegedly said. "Then we'll pivot. Drop a new story on charity work. Push sympathy angle. People forget faster than they forgive." In another clip, a consultant reportedly advised her to personalize the conflict. The more emotional she appeared, the stronger the connection with the audience. The voice replied, softly but with conviction, "Then let's give them emotion." Those words haunted Doria. They weren't the words of a woman being hounded by the press. They were the words of a strategist who knew how to manipulate hearts and headlines. The emails also revealed phrases like control crisis cadence and mirror morality. One strategy document explained that by mimicking the moral language of the public, justice, compassion, inclusion, even manipulative tactics could appear noble. The same memo instructed PR teams to use moral framing to deflect criticism. The logic was simple. Anyone who questioned Meghan's motives could be accused of bias or bigotry. Once that narrative took hold, even legitimate criticism would sound like prejudice. That strategy worked for years. The monarchy, hesitant to appear insensitive or defensive, remained largely silent. Every rebuttal was framed as cruelty. Every attempt at correction was labeled as oppression. Meghan's media narrative became self-reinforcing. Criticism proved her point, and sympathy fueled her platform. It was the perfect loop. Doria's conscience, however, wouldn't allow her to rest. The more she learned, the more she feared what her daughter had built. Friends close to her say she wrestled with guilt. Guilt for staying silent, guilt for enabling Meghan's early rise, guilt for not seeing the warning signs sooner. She had raised her daughter to be independent and strong, but now she wondered whether she had unknowingly planted the seed of something darker, ambition without restraint. When the first fragments of the royal smear blueprint began circulating among journalists, public reaction was explosive. Supporters of Meghan dismissed it as fabrication, insisting it was part of a smear campaign against her. But the technical metadata told another story. The timestamps, the file origins, the language style, they matched known correspondences from Meghan's team. A leading cybersecurity analyst verified that at least a portion of the leaks were authentic. What Doria had found wasn't rumor. It was reality. The revelations forced the palace into quiet panic. For years, royal communication relied on stability and restraint. Suddenly, they were facing a coordinated modern PR assault designed to erode their legitimacy. Behind closed doors, advisors began reassessing everything, from public appearances to statement timing. One senior aide was quoted saying, "We weren't just dealing with bad press anymore. We were dealing with a machine." Meanwhile, in California, Meghan's inner circle tightened. Reports suggest that she sensed a leak but couldn't pinpoint its source. She allegedly accused several former employees of betrayal, unaware that the person holding the most damning information was the one she trusted most, her own mother. For Doria, this was the point of no return. The calm, composed woman the public once admired was now living under immense moral pressure. Her decision wasn't made. The final push came during a phone call that started like any other. Meghan sounded tense, irritated. "Mom, I need you to stay quiet about some of the things you've been hearing," she said abruptly. "People are trying to twist narratives. You might get contacted. Don't engage." Doria froze. Meghan rarely spoke to her that way, clipped, authoritative like a CEO issuing orders. "Why would anyone contact me?" Doria asked softly. There was a pause on the line. Then Meghan's tone shifted. "Because people can't stand that I'm winning," she said. "They'll make up anything to bring me down. But it's all under control. My team's handling it. Under control." The phrase echoed like a warning. Doria hung up with her chest tight and her mind racing. Her daughter wasn't afraid. She was in command. That realization chilled her more than any rumor ever could. For days after that call, Doria couldn't eat. She went through the motions of her routine, teaching yoga, running errands, pretending everything was fine. But inside, she was unraveling. She began hearing her daughter's voice in her head, repeating those same phrases. "Control the narrative, stay 2 headlines ahead. It's all under control." They sounded less like strategy now and more like confession. By the time Doria sat down at her kitchen table that night, surrounded by the files and recordings she had uncovered, she knew she couldn't stay silent anymore. Silence, she realized, wasn't strength. It was surrender. Before taking any action, Doria sought counsel from one of her oldest friends, a retired journalist she trusted deeply. They met at a small cafe away from prying eyes. Doria spoke slowly at first, her voice trembling as she described what she'd found. The emails, the documents, the recordings. Her friend listened in disbelief. "If what you're saying is true," he said, "this isn't just a scandal. It's a deception of global scale. But if you go public, you'll destroy her." Doria nodded, tears forming in her eyes. "She's already destroying herself," she whispered. "And if I stay quiet, I'm helping her do it." Her friend warned her of the consequences. Once leaked, there would be no going back. Meghan would see it as betrayal, not truth. The public would turn on Doria. Her reputation, her peace, her relationship with her daughter, all of it would vanish. But Doria had already crossed the point of no return in her mind. The weight of what she knew was too heavy to bear alone. "I don't want to hurt her," she said quietly. "I just want her to stop." Over the next few weeks, Doria gathered everything she had. She organized the files, labeled recordings, and created duplicates in case anything happened to her. It wasn't an act of revenge. It was an act of preservation. For herself, for the truth, and perhaps even for Meghan's soul. When she finally decided to share the evidence, she didn't go to tabloids or gossip outlets. She reached out through intermediaries to investigative journalists with reputations for integrity. People who would verify, not sensationalize. If this was going to come out, it had to come out clean. The moment she hit send, Doria felt her hands go numb. The silence afterward was deafening. She sat at her kitchen table staring at the empty mug in front of her, unsure if she'd just done the right thing or made the biggest mistake of her life. For years, she had been defined by her loyalty to Meghan. That identity had anchored her. Now, in a single act, she had cut the anchor loose. News of the leaks spread faster than she could have imagined. Within days, international outlets were running stories about the secret PR empire behind Meghan Markle. Her name appeared in headlines, linked to phrases she never thought she'd see beside it. Whistleblower, betrayer, mother-turned-informer. Reporters camped outside her home, demanding statements. Doria refused to speak publicly. She let the evidence speak for itself. But inside, she was collapsing. The guilt, the loss, the overwhelming sense of finality. It all hit her at once. She had done what she believed was right, but righteousness doesn't ease the pain of breaking your own heart. Meanwhile, across the ocean, Meghan's world erupted. Her inner circle went into crisis mode, scrambling to contain the fallout. Statements were drafted, denials issued, and blame quietly reassigned. But nothing could undo the damage. The leaks had credibility. They contained data trails, timestamps, and authentic voice recordings. Every attempt to dismiss them as fake only drew more attention. The media, once her tool, was now her enemy. For the first time, Meghan couldn't control the narrative. In private, Meghan reportedly felt more betrayed than furious. Those who spoke to her during that period described her as eerily calm, detached, and focused only on identifying who had leaked the files. It never occurred to her that it could be her mother. When she finally found out, her reaction was chillingly simple. "She'll regret this," she said. No shouting, no tears, just a cold certainty. The woman who once called her mother her guiding light now saw her as a liability. For Doria, the days following the leak were surreal. She avoided television, but snippets of commentary reached her everywhere. Some called her brave, others called her cruel. She received messages of support from strangers and threats from fanatics. But none of it mattered compared to the silence from her daughter. No call, no message, nothing. The bond that had defined her life was gone, replaced by a void she didn't know how to fill. In the weeks that followed, Doria withdrew even further. Friends described her as haunted, carrying an invisible weight. Yet beneath the sorrow was a fragile sense of relief. The truth was no longer locked inside her. The burden had been shared. Whether the world believed her or not, she had finally done what she thought was right. That conviction, however painful, was the only thing keeping her upright. Her breaking point wasn't a single act. It was a slow surrender to truth, the realization that love doesn't always mean silence, that protecting someone isn't the same as enabling them. Doria had spent years being her daughter's shield. Now she had become her mirror, and what Meghan saw reflected back at her was not admiration or forgiveness, but consequence. For the world, the leaks were a scandal. For Doria, they were a confession. She hadn't destroyed her daughter's life. She had exposed the part of it that was already rotting. And in doing so, she had freed herself from the lie that had bound them both. The storm had broken. The world knew the truth. But for Doria Ragland, the cost of honesty was a silence deeper than any she had ever known. The files had been damning enough, but it was the voice notes that shattered everything. They weren't just data, they were emotion, living, breathing proof that this wasn't rumor or speculation. It was reality, caught in Meghan's own tone, her rhythm, her unmistakable voice. The first of the recordings was almost mundane at the start. Meghan spoke casually, as though dictating ideas to someone she trusted. But then the tone shifted. "They think I'll crumble," she said. "They don't realize I've already planned 3 moves ahead. Let them talk. Every word they say becomes material." There was a pause, then a low laugh. The kind of laugh that made Doria's chest tighten when she first heard it. It wasn't the warm, infectious sound she remembered from Meghan's younger years. It was cold, measured, the sound of someone enjoying control. There were dozens of voice files. Some were short, no more than a few seconds, snippets of conversation, reminders to staff, ideas for media campaigns. Others were longer, detailed recordings between Meghan and her PR consultants, where they discussed specific members of the royal family by name. One recording, later verified by multiple analysts, captured Meghan referencing a senior royal aide who had criticized her work ethic. "Will ruin his credibility," she allegedly said. "Plant a story about internal bias. He'll fold." The consultant's voice on the other end agreed, offering to draft sympathetic leaks through anonymous industry sources. Doria remembered sitting frozen at her kitchen table, headphones pressed to her ears, listening to her daughter's voice calmly outlining strategies to dismantle people she once called colleagues. The voice notes didn't sound like the victimized woman the world had come to know. They sounded like a commander giving instructions. Doria couldn't reconcile that tone with the daughter she had raised. Meghan had always been sharp, yes, ambitious, decisive, but never cruel. Yet the recordings revealed something else entirely. This wasn't the language of defense. This was offense, premeditated and precise. "Never let emotion show in the first 24 hours, Meghan said in one clip. "Play patience. People mistake patience for pain, and pain for innocence. It's perception judo." That phrase, perception judo, stayed with Doria. It was the kind of phrase only a strategist would use, the kind that turned empathy into a tool. One of the most disturbing recordings, and the one that later caused the greatest uproar when leaked, was from a meeting labeled Crown Dynamics Session. It featured Meghan allegedly discussing how to modernize royal perception by eroding outdated archetypes. The conversation wasn't about reform. It was about positioning. She spoke of shifting focus from monarchy to individual influence, suggesting that public loyalty can be redirected. In essence, it sounded like a plan to weaken the royal family's institutional image so that her own platform could shine brighter in contrast. Doria listened to that recording 3 times before she accepted what she was hearing. Her daughter wasn't just reacting to injustice. She was trying to reshape power itself. As these files circulated quietly among a handful of journalists and investigators, the gravity of what Doria had done began to dawn on her. She hadn't just leaked evidence of corruption or hypocrisy. She had exposed a voice, her daughter's voice, to a world ready to tear it apart. Yet she couldn't deny that part of her felt relief. The truth was no longer just a secret festering in her conscience. Still, the cost of that truth grew heavier each day. The analysts who first reviewed the recordings were stunned by their authenticity. Linguistic specialists confirmed that the voice matched Meghan's natural speaking cadence. Acoustic experts ruled out AI manipulation or splicing. The content, however, was what truly captured the world's attention. It wasn't just 1 or 2 questionable remarks. It was a pattern. The recordings revealed a meticulous awareness of timing, narrative control, and emotional manipulation. One consultant on the tape even suggested fabricating accidental paparazzi moments to elicit sympathy. "People don't believe what you tell them," Meghan said. "They believe what they think they're not supposed to see." The impact of these voice notes on public perception was immediate and seismic. For years, Meghan had positioned herself as the underdog, the woman silenced by an oppressive system. But now, the recordings suggested something more sinister, that she had, at least in part, manufactured that image herself. Media outlets from London to New York dissected every second of the tapes, parsing her words for meaning, motive, and manipulation. Royal watchers who had once defended her found themselves questioning everything. The narrative was unraveling. Doria tried to stay away from the coverage, but isolation only made her imagination worse. Every time she turned on her phone, she saw fragments of her daughter's voice played out of context. Words she had heard in private now blasted across screens worldwide. Some reporters framed Doria as a courageous whistleblower, others as a traitor. None understood the private anguish behind her silence. She didn't want fame, didn't want vindication. She wanted her daughter to remember who she used to be. But the woman in those recordings wasn't that person anymore. There were still a few recordings Doria hadn't released. Some were too personal, too damning. One in particular haunted her. It was an exchange between Meghan and an unnamed associate discussing the royal family's public reputation. The consultant mentioned that attacking certain members directly could backfire. Meghan's reply was calm, almost detached. "Then we don't attack," she said. "We guide opinion. Let others do the talking. Truth is perception, and perception is power." Doria stopped the playback halfway through. She didn't need to hear the rest. The idea that truth could be treated as malleable, as something to bend rather than honor, was the final blow to her faith in her daughter's moral compass. Meanwhile, the world began speculating about Doria's motives. Was she acting out of guilt, out of fear, or had she simply snapped under the weight of secrets too heavy to carry? The truth was more complicated. Doria wasn't seeking revenge or exposure. She was seeking redemption. She had watched her daughter's transformation in silence for too long, justifying every ethical compromise as the price of survival. But when she heard Meghan's voice describing empathy as a tool of leverage, something inside her broke. Empathy was supposed to be the one thing they shared, the foundation of their bond. To hear it twisted into strategy was unbearable. As the voice notes spread, they triggered chaos inside Meghan's world. Her team scrambled to issue statements of denial, claiming the tapes were selectively edited and contextually misleading. But forensic analysis undercut those claims. Each recording had a verifiable timestamp, matching email correspondences and calendar entries. There was no plausible way to explain them away. The PR firms involved began distancing themselves quietly, shutting down websites, deleting online portfolios, and erasing client lists. The entire network began to collapse under scrutiny. In London, the palace's reaction was more subdued but no less intense. Behind closed doors, staff members held urgent briefings, reviewing transcripts line by line. For the monarchy, this wasn't merely a scandal, it was an existential threat. The recordings didn't just reveal attacks on individuals. They exposed an attempt to undermine the entire institution. According to insiders, King Charles listened to one of the recordings personally. When it ended, he reportedly sat in silence for several minutes before saying only, "She never wanted to join us. She wanted to replace us." Doria's breaking point had been moral, but the world's was emotional. Listeners heard not just words but tone, that cold precision, that detached confidence. It made everything Meghan had said in past interviews sound rehearsed in hindsight. Every tearful pause, every emotional anecdote. Now it all seemed deliberate. Even those who had once admired her authenticity began to feel deceived. In the weeks that followed, new voice notes surfaced through independent sources. Some contained strategic discussions about social media engagement. Others were internal conversations about legal intimidation tactics against journalists. The cumulative effect was devastating. The public began to see Meghan not as the silenced duchess but as the mastermind of her own myth. Doria watched it all unfold from the quiet of her home, consumed by guilt. She never intended for the world to devour her daughter. She wanted accountability, not annihilation. Yet once truth escapes, it can't be controlled. That was the irony. Meghan had built an empire on controlling perception, and now perception was devouring her. The world's fascination with the recordings didn't fade quickly. They became cultural artifacts, debated, analyzed, weaponized. Some people insisted they revealed a brilliant strategist misunderstood by her peers. Others saw them as proof of deceit. But beneath the noise, one fact remained unchanged. A mother had exposed her daughter to the world, and there was no taking it back. Late one evening, Doria sat on her porch as the California sun dipped below the horizon. She replayed one final recording, not to analyze or regret, but to remember. In it, Meghan's voice was softer, almost human again. She was laughing about something trivial, her old warmth flickering through. "You always said I could do anything, Mom," she said in the recording. "I just never thought it would come with this much noise." Doria closed her eyes. For a brief moment, she heard not the strategist, not the Duchess, but her little girl again, the one who once dreamed of changing the world for the better. She knew that version was gone now, consumed by ambition and power. The recordings were all that remained, echoes of a transformation she couldn't stop, a legacy she couldn't repair. Doria didn't regret telling the truth, but she mourned what it had cost her. The silence that followed those voice notes was louder than any scandal. What the world heard was shocking. What Doria heard was heartbreak. And as the last recording ended, with Meghan's voice fading into static, Doria whispered to the empty room, "I hope one day you'll understand why I did this." When the first transcript of the voice notes reached Buckingham Palace, it was delivered in a plain folder, unmarked, quietly placed on the desk of a senior royal aide. The corridors were silent that morning, the air heavy with that strange stillness that comes before history shifts. The aide read the first few lines, frowned, and kept reading. By the time he reached the fourth page, his hands were trembling. The words were unmistakable, Meghan's tone, her phrasing, her rhythm. It was the same polished voice that once captivated global audiences in interviews, now speaking with ruthless precision about how to manipulate public sympathy against the very family that had welcomed her. The aide closed the folder and whispered, "We have a crisis." Within hours, a discreet meeting was called inside Clarence House. Only a handful of people were present: King Charles, Queen Camilla, Prince William, and 2 senior advisors. Phones were confiscated, doors locked. The folder lay open on the table, its contents spreading like a dark stain across the polished wood. For years, the royal family had endured waves of scandal, but this was different. This wasn't rumor or speculation. This was evidence, raw, verifiable, and deeply personal. The king read the transcripts in silence, his expression unreadable. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and steady. "We do not react emotionally," he said. "Not this time. We verify, and we respond with dignity." But dignity was hard to maintain when betrayal cut this deep. The recordings didn't just